My name is Shauna Wilburn, and I'm joined today by our Chief Technology Officer, Vic Shashadri. We are here to talk with you about our CareFinity Live Archive application. CareFinity Live Archive is a software solution that we built, implement, and support here at MedTech Solutions, or you might know us as MTS. This software was created to solve data needs and issues within medical practices. MTS is an IT company, but we are a healthcare specific IT company laser focused on solving the difficult problems for providers and clinics. Many years ago, clinic groups began moving from the paper world to the electronic health world, and that was great. Clinic groups have been using their EHRs, capturing patient data electronically, and we have not looked back to that paper chart days. But now we're starting to move into a new season in the EHR world. Your providers have documented years worth of clinical data in your EHR, potentially thousands of visits, and you now have huge sums of clinical data sitting on your servers. Now we must begin to think about how do we manage all this data? And that's where CareFinity Live Archive comes into the picture. CareFinity Live Archive is an application that's true to its name. It allows you to begin to archive your data. We can start small with a limited set of criteria or go big and really work to make an immediate impact on your data. The choice is yours. With CareFinity Live Archive, we will work together to configure the application as you would see fit to archive patient records from your EHR. Within the CareFinity application, you would have the ability to view those records, and if needed, those records could be restored back into your EHR for you to use on an upcoming visit. It's really the best of both worlds. Continue to have the clinical data that you need at your fingertips, but gain the benefit of moving data out of your source EHR. So let's take a look at the CareFinity application and let us show you a little bit about what it has to offer. I'll turn it over to Vic for a demonstration.
All right, thanks, Shauna. Let's look at the Live Archive solution. I always like to start with going through the configuration to talk about how we build the archive, so it makes a lot of sense. I'm going to launch the CareFinity application and log in. We do support MFA, so I'm going to grab the code from my phone. And then I'm going to run into the configuration for the patient Live Archive. We're going to start with the settings, and we're going to work our way up from the bottom of the page. So with the Live Archive for NextGen, we break the archive out into three components. What we call the clinical archive, which is going to be data that's generated from the EHR side of the house. The billing archive is going to be data generated from the practice management side of the house. And SIG events crosses both the practice management and the EHR, but is specifically related to those significant events that are occurring in the application. Thing to note here, this is not the same as the advanced audit. This is related specifically to SIG events as they sit within the NextGen system. For the clinical and the billing archive, we give you two options for determining the data that needs to be archived out of the system. The first is to archive by date, and what we mean by that is we're purely going to be looking at the age of the data. I can configure a threshold here in months, let's say 84 months. And what I'm telling CareFinity is that any clinical data that I've identified as data that can be archived out of the system, as long as that data is more than 7 years old or 84 months old, it's eligible to be archived out of the system. This is done independent of the patient, so we do it across your entire patient population. The other option is to do it based on inactivity. When I choose to do it by inactivity, I can first set an inactivity threshold. Let's say we set this as 36 months. So what CareFinity will do now is it will first qualify patients for archiving based on their inactivity. We define inactivity as not having a billable or clinical encounter in that period of time. So in this case, 3 years or 36 months. If that patient hasn't had an encounter created in the NextGen application, they would then be eligible to be archived and be considered to be inactive. You can set this threshold as to whatever makes sense for the organization. Furthermore, once you've set the threshold, you can set a threshold time frame on top of that if you want to leave some of that patient's data inside NextGen. So for example, if I set this at 60 months, it's going to first look for all patients that have been inactive for 3 years. And then it's going to archive any data on those patients that are older than 60 months. So years 4 and 5 would still remain within the next-gen application. If I leave this blank or set it to a value less than 36 months, it's going to archive the entire patient's chart out of next-gen. In the clinical system, you can decide which sections of data you want to archive out. Document management are going to be all of that scanned image data. You can archive out of the next-gen environment. Patient images are going to be any images that have been attached directly to the patient record in next-gen. And patient documents are going to be all of those visit notes that you're creating in next-gen. So things like your master IM note, your progress notes, your intake notes, telephone call notes, test follow-up notes, letters, any of these documents that you're creating will all fall under patient documents. Those can be archived out of the system. All three of those have a file system component as well, and you can elect to archive out of your production file share if you'd like to do that. So you can reduce the growth of that file share as well, along with the growth of the database. Template data are going to be any medical records templates, whether they're custom templates or KBM templates, can be archived out of the system. The information about the age of those templates is inherited from the encounter that it's tied to. So as long as that encounter meets the criteria for archiving, the templates that sit there can be archived out as well. The one exception to this rule is the order template in NextGen, although it is a demographic template. Every row in the order template is tied to an encounter, and so we inherit the age through that encounter ID that's on that row. So we do archive the order template as well based on the criteria that's been configured. The order module is going to be any of the data that sits within that module. So that's going to be lab orders and results, diagnostic orders and results, and immunization data can be archived out. Medications, allergies, procedures, and problems are those respective modules in the EHR. The data from those can be archived out. Portal messages are going to be any patient communication through the portal that's in NextGen. Those can be archived out. And finally, HIE documents are NG share data. So the CCDAs, they're attachments that you've received from your trading partners. Those can be archived out of the system. So as an organization, you'll make a decision as to what data you want to include in the archive. You don't have to include everything. You can choose what makes sense for the organization. And that's the information that we'll archive out based on the criteria that's been defined. On the billing side, the configuration options are the same. It's either done by date or by patient inactivity. You'll notice it doesn't have to be the same between the clinical side and the billing side. So your EHR archive could be based on patient inactivity, say, and your billing archive could be based on age. So I may have a need to have 5 years worth of financial data in my PM system, but after that, I'm not running any reports that go that far back in time, so I can archive anything older than that out. So you can make that decision as to what makes sense for the organization. The one additional constraint that we have on the billing archive is the encounter has to be in a history status, meaning that we're expecting no more activity on that encounter. If that encounter is in a history status, it is eligible to be archived. So even if that encounter meets the specifications based on either age or inactivity for archiving, if it is not in a history status, it will remain in NextGen. So you can continue your collection activity on that encounter, and then eventually when it gets into a history status, it would then be eligible to be archived out of the system. On the billing side, we archive appointments, charges, claims, encounter diagnoses, encounter notes, and transactions. Charges and transactions are tied together. If you archive one, you have to archive the other. We don't want to create balances or credits on patient accounts. There's an additional caveat that if you're using the NextGen EDR tool, you will not be able to archive charges and transactions. And the reason for that is the EDR tool uses data from charges to build the odontogram in the EDR. And so if that charge data is archived out, it affects the odontogram. And so we don't archive charges or transactions for dental clients. On the significant events side, you only have one option to archive by date. So you'll have to make a decision as an organization as to whether, or I should say, how much significant event data do I need to keep within NextGen. The data that gets archived out is still available through CareFinity. It's just not available in NextGen under the history tabs that you're used to seeing it under. So you'll have to make a decision as an organization as to how much of that data makes sense for the organization. How much should I keep on hand, and how much should I file away into the archive? In terms of the types of data that we archive from SIG events, it's going to be any chart level significant events, any encounter level significant events, or any person level significant events. So anything that's tied to a person or patient in NextGen can be archived out of the system. As we're moving up further, we'll see that we have an option of enabling PEDS configuration. So what this means is it allows us to set different criteria for adult and pediatric patients. So if I have both adult and pediatric patients in my practice, and I want to define the criteria for archiving differently between the two, I can enable this configuration. You will define what the PEDS age in months means, meaning that after this age, a patient is no longer considered a pediatric patient. You can define that for your practice, and then you can set up the configuration for both the clinical and the billing archive based on whether it's an adult or a pediatric patient. The significant events is across the board, that it doesn't matter if it's an adult or a pediatric patient, it will follow the same criteria for that. The CareFinity Live Archive also offers the ability to purge data out of the archive based on a threshold. So once I've archived the data into CareFinity, I can define a threshold for how long do I want to keep that data in CareFinity before it's eligible to be purged out of the system. So you'll have to discuss this and see if it makes sense for the organization. The caveat that I'll give you, it is a process that's not recoverable. So you want to make sure that you've defined this criteria adequately based on the needs of the practice. The final couple of options here, archived expired patients allows my expired patients to skip the waiting time period. So if I do enable this option, then when patients are marked as expired, they become eligible to be archived out of the system. You have to do this very carefully, as we talked about a little bit earlier with regards to reporting requirements. Once data is removed from your NextGen environment, it's no longer available for any of the NextGen reporting. So any reporting that you're doing out of NextGen, that data will not be available in there. So you need to make sure you take that into account when deciding whether or not to enable this option. If you are running annual quality reports or things like that, you don't want to run this option because you want that patient to remain in NextGen until that reporting period is satisfied. If you don't enable this option, that patient will be treated like any other patient. Once their data meets the criteria by either age or inactivity, that data would get archived out of the system. The last option here, to restore patients from scheduled appointments, allows me to really be pretty aggressive with my inactivity setting. And what this does is it allows CareFinity to automatically push patient data back into NextGen if an appointment gets scheduled. You can define the days prior to the appointment that you want that data to come back into the system. So for example, if I set this to 3 days, 3 days prior to a scheduled appointment, the patient is restored back into the NextGen environment. The restore and archive process in CareFinity is a nightly job that runs every night and will archive any new data that's eligible to be archived out of the system based on the criteria. And it will restore any patients that need to be restored into the environment, whether it be through an automated restore by this configuration or a manual restore where a user or an administrator has made a decision that a patient needs to be restored and their data pushed back into the NextGen environment. You need to make sure you set this threshold far enough in advance if you're doing any pre-visit processes within your organization, like a huddle process. You want to make sure that data is available in NextGen prior to that huddle so that information is there and your team can treat that patient just like any other patient in the system. Those are the configuration options that we have for building the CareFinity archive. I'm going to launch the NextGen application so we can take a look at what that means for a patient that's been archived out of the system. I'm going to launch the EMR and I'm going to go into open a patient. I'm going to search for that patient. through a combination of last name and first name. So you'll notice that my archive patients still remain within the NextGen environment. You can still see those patients within NextGen. You can schedule for those patients. Any data that you didn't archive out would be available for that patient from within NextGen. I'm going to do a find, and there's my patient, and I'm going to open them up. The first thing you'll notice is that we do create an alert when a patient is archived. That alert's available on both the EHR and the PM side of the application. This tells your users that, hey, this patient is archived. There's more data available within the CareFinity application. You can make a decision as part of during your implementation as to whether you want that archive on the EHR side to be disruptive, meaning it pops open this window and I have to close this window before I can continue into the patient record? Or do I want it to be a passive alert, in which case it'll show up in this alerts tab up here and I can hover over it to read the information regarding the fact that this is an archive patient. Either way, that alert will automatically get generated as part of that archiving process for you. The other thing you'll notice on the EHR side is we leave all the encounters in place. They're all empty, but it's another visual indicator for your team that this patient has archive data that's available in CareFinity. In the live archive scenario, we embed CareFinity right into NextGen. It's available as a template in the NextGen environment, and we would recommend that you put it right in your patient information bar for quick launch. You can see I've got an option here to launch CareFinity. I can click on that, and it's going to launch the CareFinity application embedded into NextGen. It does a single sign-on into CareFinity and brings me into the CareFinity homepage for this patient. So you can see I'm looking at clinical data for this patient, a diagnosis, allergy, medication, visit, lab, and order history for that patient, even though my NextGen chart is empty. If I open up the modules here in NextGen for that patient, you can see things are empty for that patient. So if I jump into the medication module, there's no medications available for that patient. However, in CareFinity, I can still see the medications on that patient here in my medication section. So although the data has been archived out, you still have access to the information. You can still access that data, so your team can still look up data if they need to, if the opportunity presents itself, even though that's an archive patient in the system. We're going to run through the different sections of the CareFinity application here to give you an idea of the data that's available in CareFinity. I'm going to close this or make this part of the window a little smaller so we get a little more real estate here on CareFinity to work with. The first option, the first page that you come into, I should say, is your home page in CareFinity. The dashboard is a longitudinal view of the patient's data, broken out by the different clinical sections that I just mentioned. You'll be able to see the top 5 most recent data elements that are available for each of these sections for that patient. When I open that patient, it opened a navigation here that lets me go through the patient's CareFinity chart, so you can see the different pieces of information that's available within CareFinity. The patient timeline is another home page that you can use from within CareFinity. This allows me to view patient data more in a more graphical manner on a timeline. I can navigate through that timeline by moving back and forth in time. I can zoom in if I want to look at specific events on that timeline for that patient. I can look at the details of the data. So for example, this diagnosis code that was available, I can view that information from within here. As an organization, you can make a decision whether you want your homepage to be this graphical patient timeline or the longitudinal dashboard that we have available here. Either way, you can bounce back and forth between the two options just by navigating through on the patient navigation here. The diagnosis screen will show me patient diagnosis history. You'll see the date the diagnosis was captured on, the onset date if it was available, the code and condition, any diagnosed, the status, the diagnosed date for that, and whether or not it's a resolved problem are available for you here. A few things to note on our pages in CareFinity. The first is we do page all of our data. So if CareFinity is being accessed through the internet, which it can be in the live archive scenario, because with live archive, you get our CareFinity downtime, and it may make sense to house the downtime application in a different data center than where your where your NextGen sits. So you're able to access the information in the event of an outage. Um, the paging allows us to access that information in a pretty robust way. The second is our columns are all sortable, where you see the up and down arrow. And thirdly, you can filter or search for data from within each of the screens as it makes sense to do so. We also give you the option to print data out of CareFinity. This is a user right. So if your user has the rights to do this, you'll be able to print data out of the CareFinity application. Allergies will show me the patient's allergy history. You'll see the visit date the allergy was captured on, the onset date of that allergy, the resolve date, if it's available, the ingredient or allergen, any brand name information associated with that, the patient's reaction, and the provider who captured that into the system. Medications will show me the patient's medication history. You'll see the start date of the medication and dose, the quantity and refills, the stop date, and the prescribing provider. Visits will show me the patient's visit history. Where has this patient been within the organization? You'll see the date of the visit, the type of visit, any details associated with it, the rendering provider they saw, and the location they saw them. Labs will show me the patient's laboratory history. The way we do that in CareFinity is by panel. So at the top of the page, you have a drop down of all the different panels this patient has had. And then underneath that, you'll see the data for that panel. So if I move to the CBC, I'll see all the different components tied to that CBC. My test patient here doesn't have much data, but you'd be able to look at all of their laboratory data. Orders will show me the patient's order history. You'll see the date of the order, the type of order, the description of that order, the status of that order, and who placed that order into the system. Vitals will show me patient's vitals measurements. You'll see the date and time the vital was taken, the height, weight, BMI, blood pressure, pulse rate, temperature, resps, pulse ox, and head circumference. Whatever was available, whatever was captured that day, you'll be able to see that data in CareFinity. You can also generate growth charts from archive data for those pediatricians. If they wanted to be able to pull up a historic growth chart from data that's been archived out, you can do that from within CareFinity as well. Documents are going to show you patient's document history. These are going to be those notes that have been created. The way we do that in CareFinity is the first tab is a chronological tab, so chronologically descending all of the different documents this patient has. You'll see the date and time of the visit, the description of the document, the user that created it, the create date time. The format is really for our use to render that document, and then you can come in and view that document. So although I have no documents or images in my chart in CareFinity, I'm sorry, in NextGen, I'm still able to come in through CareFinity and view those notes from within here. So it can be really powerful on your archive strategy because that data is still accessible. You can still get to the information. It's just not sitting within the NextGen environment. Back will take me back to my document listing. To the right of the All tab, I've got pillboxes that have each of the document types. So if I wanted to look for a specific document type, I could certainly click on that and view that specific document type from within here as well. Images are going to be all of your scanned image data, whether it's images or data that's in document management, or it could be images that are attached directly to the patient record through the EHR. The way we do that in CareFinity is through the view category. So you'll see all of the different view categories this patient has, along with the thumbnail of those images that are available. So if I jump back to NextGen here and I go into my category tab, you'll see that it's blank. There are no categories because that data has been archived out, but I can still come in and view that information in CareFinity. If I click on the diagnostic test, for example, I can see thumbnails of the diagnostic tests that are available here for me. If I click on the document itself, I can go in and see a detailed view of that document. I'm sorry, of that image. Back will take me back to the category view. If I wanted to look at a different image, I could certainly do that from here. Financials will show me financial data on the patient. The way we do that in CareFinity is we give you a summary across the top across all time. So total charges, total payments, total adjustments, and then anything that's outstanding. So in this case, you see I have $101 outstanding. So that information is available in CareFinity. Underneath that, you get a encounter level summary. So the encounter number, the encounter date and time, the rendering on that encounter, and that same information. So total payments, total charges, total payments, total adjustments, and then anything that's outstanding for that patient. If you drill into the encounter, you'll see first the insurance information. This patient doesn't have any, but you would be able to see primary, secondary, tertiary insurances here. Under the details, you'll see charge information, data service of the charge, the procedure code, the amount, any payments or adjustments, and where the outstanding balance sits. And then if you drill into a charge, you can see transaction details. This charge doesn't have any, so I'm seeing no records found, but you would be able to see that under here. And then finally, the encounter note details will show me any encounter notes that were created on the PM side. So I can come and view that data from within CareFinity as well. Back will take me back to my financial listing. If I wanted to look at a different encounter, I could certainly do that from here. The patient restore allows me to restore patient data into NextGen. As I said earlier, this is a nightly job. So if a patient is queued to be restored into the system, that nightly process will run and their data will be available in NextGen the next day. You can make a decision during implementation if you want this to be an end user functionality like I have here and available in my toolbar in CareFinity, or do I want to limit it to administrators, in which case it would be done through the live archive configuration that we talked about a little bit earlier. There's an option to restore patients from that screen in the application. So that would limit it to only your administrative users to be able to restore patients. Whether it's an administrative user or an end user, the process is exactly the same. The first thing you have to do is decide what data do I want to restore back. You have two options. You can restore everything in the archive back into NextGen, or you can restore a specific date range back into NextGen. What you can't do is restore specific data elements. So for example, I can't decide that I want to restore lab results for a patient. You're going to restore everything that's in the archive. And the reason for that is there's one source of truth for a given period of time for the data that's been chosen to be archived out of the system. Either that data is in the archive or it's in NextGen. I'm going to choose to restore everything on this patient. And then it's going to ask me for a confirmation. Are you sure you want to restore this data? I could cancel here, and in which case nothing would happen. I'm going to say yes, I want to restore that data. And then what would happen normally is that restore would be skewed for tonight's run. So when that run occurs, the data would be restored into the NextGen system and would be available for us to view within NextGen. I'm going to have that process kicked off so we can get an idea of what that looks like here in a few minutes. Significant events are going to show me any of the significant events that have been archived out of NextGen. One thing I should note, we talked about using CareFinity as a downtime solution when you have the live archive solution. All of the data that we've just looked at is going to be available on all of your patients, regardless of whether they've been archived out of NextGen or not. So in the event of an outage, you can go into CareFinity and view all of that information that we just talked about. The SIG events is the one exception to this rule. We do not we do not copy significant event data into downtime for all of your patients. It's only available on archive patients. It's not a very meaningful piece of data during a downtime, and it just adds a lot of overhead to include that in the downtime process. So it's only going to be available on your archive patients, and you can see the information here on their significant event tabs. You'll see the significant event date, an encounter number if there is one, the description of that event, the message itself, what did the user do that caused the significant event to be captured, any pre or post modification data. So if I changed a zip code, what was that zip code prior to the significant event change? What was the zip code after will be available here. And then the user that affected that change will be available for you here as well. So even though that data is archived out of NextGen, it's still available to you. It's still accessible for you in the NextGen application through CareFinity. So I can still view that information. I haven't lost visibility into that data. The last option here, export clinical data, is how I would do a records release request if I got a records release for archived patients. You don't have to restore that patient back in NextGen to release their information. You can do it through CareFinity. In CareFinity, we have two methods of exporting. The first is to export a CCDA. So I could choose to do this, and it will create a longitudinal CCDA with all of the data that's in CareFinity. So all of that discrete data can be put into that CCDA for export. The other option is to select the data that I want to include in that export. The way we do that in CareFinity is you have a drop down of the discrete data elements that are in CareFinity. So diagnoses, allergies, meds, visits, labs, orders, and vitals. You can choose what you want to include in that PDF export for that third party to be able to get. And then finally, the documents and images, you have the ability to select which documents and images you want to include in that export. You could select everything by clicking on the tab, the checkbox up top. That's going to select everything in the patient record. You could select everything and unselect certain things if I didn't want to include them. You can only select certain things. So if it makes sense, you may want to only get these first two documents, for example, or images in this case, from the system. You could filter by a date range. So if I get a records release request for all of the records from 2015 to 2018, for example, I could filter by that date range and export only that data out of the system. Once I've made all my selections, I can click on the export button, and CareFinity will create a single PDF that contains all of that data. At the bottom of the page, you have a historic record of everything that's been exported for that patient. So you can always go back and see what was exported for that patient. You'll see the date and time it was exported. You can click on this hyperlink to see what was exported. So in this case, I've got one document that was exported. And then you can come in and view the comments associated with that export. And then you can actually view that export as well from within here in CareFinity. I'm not sure if this is available in my test system. Let's take a look. So it included one image in that export that I have there. Back will take me back to my export clinical data tab, and I could certainly look at another export if I wanted to do that from here. Okay, let's take a look at that patient now that the restore process is complete. I'm going to close that patient from CareFinity, I'm sorry, from NextGen, and then I'm going to reopen them. So I'm going to go back to my patient, and I'm going to search for my previous patient, and there's my blue-green, and I'm going to open that patient back up. The first thing you'll notice is my alert did not pop up. That patient is no longer archived, so that alert is gone from the system. If I hover over my alerts tab here, you'll see that it's gone. It's no longer there. My information is available. I have all of the data back into CareFinity, I'm sorry, into NextGen. You'll see all of the different encounters that are populated here. If I go to my category view, you'll see I have category information available for me here as well again. I can go into my modules. If I go into my medication module, I've got that medication data back into CareFinity, I'm sorry, back into NextGen again, and available for me here. From your end user's perspective, it's like nothing has changed. Your end users are going to be able to do everything they used to do before with that data once it's restored back into NextGen as they were able to do prior to the archiving. So this can let you get pretty aggressive with your archive strategy, especially around the idea of inactivity, because you can combine this with the automatic restore based on the appointment book. So if that patient does present themselves, they do decide they're going to come back into the clinic and they schedule an appointment, you can have CareFinity automatically push all of that data back into the NextGen application. So it's sitting there available for you, and you can continue with your operations as if nothing had changed. By doing this, you can leverage the archive. You can remove data that's not very meaningful from your NextGen environment. reduce the amount of data that's in your database, reduce the amount of data that's in your file system. It makes things easier to load within the next-gen environment. It slows the growth of your next-gen environment from a hardware perspective as well, and can be beneficial to your team from that perspective. That's CareFinity Live Archive. Shauna, I'll hand it back to you.
As we begin to wrap up today, let's take a moment to talk through the challenges that we hope to solve with CareFinity. The first one being business continuity. Whether it be a planned or unplanned outage, CareFinity can serve as a resource for the practice, allowing the clinical team to still see patients, create notes, and even capture charges. And then once connectivity is restored, the notes and charges can flow back into your source EHR. Another value of CareFinity is the ability to access it anywhere on any device. If you are rounding at the hospital and want to pull up a chart on your laptop or tablet, you can. If you're seeing a patient at a nursing home and want to pull up a chart or look at a piece of information like a past medication or what the patient's vitals were the last time that you saw them, go for it. Not only does CareFinity help with the archiving of your data, but it also takes snapshots of your current data and provides convenient access to you anytime, anywhere. Medical legal challenges has been a very interesting transition from the paper world to the electronic world for clinical documentation. We have had so many processes in place for the paper world, but when we move to the electronic world, we seem to abandon those processes. Why? We still need to archive data in the electronic world just as we did in the paper world. We still need to destroy charts once they've reached their retention criteria. CareFinity Live Archive is the solution to help you meet these needs. And then finally, chart performance. In EHRs today, it's a common issue that when you need to open the chart of a routine patient, it just takes time to load. There's a lot of data, content, and images for the system to process. CareFinity Live Archive is a solution for this issue by archiving some of the older content out of your database and freeing up the processing power of your EHR to make available to you more recent content for your clinical decision-making needs. So let's recap. With CareFinity Live Archive, we would be expecting to experience increased speed when loading complex patient charts, to free up EHR database space so that you can continue adding new content into your database without seeing the additional growth in hardware needs, restore archived records back into your source EHR when needed, have a Plan B solution and access to your clinical and financial data in the event of a planned or unplanned outage, control archiving rules, and help you facilitate and support secure, compliant, long-term data access. I hope this discussion has been beneficial for your needs and helped illustrate how CareFinity Live Archive can benefit you personally as well as your practice. If we can provide any additional information, or if you would like to schedule a demonstration for your organization, please do not hesitate to reach out. We would love to hear from you. Thank you so very much for your time today.